All right, let's do this. Let's make our next animation move. Now we're going to close DJV because these are all rendered subframes, and they're not going to help us any. So we'll kind of clean up our environment a little bit. I'll go ahead and I'll just lower it. All right, and so I have my documentation from my first 10 keyframes, and this has been saved. I have saved my animation. All right, so matter of fact, let's just do it. Let's just do it. I'm gonna call this session 115 at keyframe 10. All right, yeah, okay, keyframe 11. I'm sorry. Okay, good. All right, I don't need to save the project because the project didn't change. The animation did. All right. So according to my documentation here, the next keyframe, okay, that took us to 10, good, good. So my next keyframe is going to be keyframe 11. All right, 11. Let me just put a number in there, a number 11, and that's going to take us to keyframe 12. All right, and that's going to take us from, well, okay. All right, good. Okay, what are we going to do? We're going to fly. Okay. What we want to do here is we want to fly forward and dive down and see if we can dive over that that area here towards the bottom of our frame. Let's see if we can do that. So in order to do that, I can envision what I have to do. And I'm definitely going to fly forward. Now, how far do I fly forward? All right, that's a good question. All right, let's see if we can answer that. You'll notice here that I have been flying forward 600 steps. Now, what that 600 steps means is, let's see if we can keep this in view here. What that 600 steps right here means is 3 clicks of the forward button, all right, and times 200. Oh, I was, looks like I was abbreviating that. Times 200, let's get that in right. All right, and that was actually right. Right, so forward 3 times 200. Okay, equals, good, that equals 600. Very good. I'm going to save my documentation. I just kind of improved a little bit, made it a little bit more readable. All right, so I want to keep my same forward speed. So I don't want to do any faster or slower. I mean, I could if I wanted to, but the whole idea is just to kind of, like that. So we're definitely going to have, oh, let's get this, push this down. Let's get this over here where you can see it. Okay, so we're definitely going to have a forward, and we're definitely going to want to keep our speed. So that pretty much stays the same. All right, plus, now what are we going to do? All right, we're moving forward. Now, we do need to look down, right? And, right, so we're kind of doing, let's get our whiteboard up here. All right. Here's our Mandelbulb object. Here's our flight path so far. We've leveled out. And so what we want to do is zoom like that. And then we'll probably do something like that down there. So this right here is definitely going to be a forward. It's going to be a look down. It's also going to be a slide down. All right. We don't want to slide down too hard, or we don't want to look too hard, but that's the 3 moves that we need to make here. So let's see. We're planning them out now. All right. So I want to look down, ND. LD, and I have this set for 5 right here. Yeah, let's do a 1 times 5 look down plus we're going to do a slide down SD, which is going to be 1 times, so what do we have for slide down? 200. That's too much. That's going to be too much. Now I could either do a shift, or I can actually go in here and modify that value just before I press the shift down, slide down. But I'll tell you, I'm just going to do a shift. I'm going to do a shift 1, and that's going to be times 200, so that'll give me 100. The shift cuts it in half. All right, so let's ask ourselves, what do we do next? All right, sorry, this is going to be keyframe 10 to 11. So I'm going to copy that. This is going to be keyframe 11 through 12. All right, and yeah, I want to continue that curve down. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that 3 times. All right. Keyframes 12 through 13. There's my 3. All right. So make sure I'm on an empty keyframe. All right, and let's try it. Let's just make sure that we're at the appropriate keyframe. I'm going to send this keyframe down to main. This can be 800 by 450. We'll calculate that. Get my view up here better. Okay. All right, I'm going to pull that over to the navigator. All I'm doing is making sure that I'm actually navigating from keyframe 10. Get off that. That's easy to forget, because it doesn't warn you. It will happily overwrite this keyframe. So you just have to kind of remember to keep getting yourself on a nice empty keyframe slot. Let's try our move. All right. Let's see. We're going to do forward 3. 1, 2, 3. That's too much, I can already tell. We're going to do a look down 1 time. Yeah, it's too much. We're going to do a shift down, a shift slide down, shift slide down. All right, push that up to our animation window. We're going to do a second one here. 1, 2, 3 forward, 1 look down, 1 shift slide down. Push that up to our animation. We're going to do a third one. I can already tell we're in trouble here. All right, 1, 2, 3 forward. All right, and we're going to do 1 look down, no shift, and 1 slide down with a shift. Push that up to our animation. Now, all right, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to start rendering these 3. All right, I want to preview these 3. So I want to preview from keyframes 11 to the last. I'm only interested in the 3 keyframes that I just put in. Now, all right, I'm going to put up on the screen the session where I had talked about this. Do you see here how my far plane got all messed up? Look at that. My far plane here is now 2740. I was working at somewhere like 9940 or something. And now my far plane, however it happened when I brought this keyframe down to main and then over to navigator, I lost my far plane. And I did not look to check that far plane. I'll tell you, I can't tell you how many times I have overlooked that. I don't know what this thing is doing. I don't know if it's making a calculation or if it's a bug. I don't know what's going on, but I can tell you this. I forget that so many times. And it's just one of those things you have to train yourself. You have to say anytime that you bring a keyframe down the main and over to Navigator, you probably have a far plane which is all messed up. Now, because this far plane is now 2740, it basically means, and we talked about this, but this is just a review. I'll just do it up here. All right. So you have your Mandelbulb world, and your far plane basically says, if my far plane is, I don't know, whatever it is, 10,000, and you make that 5,000, your far plane is closer, which means that anything on this side of the far plane is not going to be rendered in your view. All right, so I got burned and you got to learn. So we're going to end this session right here. I'm going to go ahead and do the preview on this, and let's see what the impact of our picture is. All right, I'll see you in the next session.